And in this next block, so we're continuing on the theme of vaccines. So we're going to have 3 talks and then potentially short discussion, taking us up to lunch. And so our first speaker is Arminder Deol, who is from CEPI, and is going to tell us about the 100 days mission for vaccines.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Arminder Deol, and I lead the Data Science and Advanced Analysis team in the Department of Epidemiology and Data Science at CEPI. I don't usually get a chance to talk about the 100-day mission at the CEPI level, so I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. My background is modeling and epidemiology, and these slides were kindly prepared by our strategy team at CEPI. So my talk is on the 100-day mission, and the question is, what if we had life-saving vaccines in 100 days? Previously, the fastest any vaccine had been developed and approved was 4 years. COVID-19 vaccines, however, were advanced at record speeds due to prior research in other coronaviruses and innovations. But what if we could go even quicker? The coronavirus vaccine, if the coronavirus vaccine had been developed within 100 days, this would have meant that by April 2020, we would have only had 2.3 million cases, as opposed to the almost 70 million cases that we had by December 8th. The faster an effective vaccine is developed and deployed, the faster a pandemic can be contained and controlled. So the goal for CEPI is for the world to be able to respond to the next disease X with a new vaccine in just 100 days. But this is not intended to be a standalone effort. Improved surveillance, providing earlier detection and warning with swift and effective use of non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as social distancing to suppress disease transmission, contact tracing, and others. Delivering a vaccine in 100 days would give the world a fighting chance to reduce the threat of a future pandemic virus. And CEPI likes to call this the moonshot mission because although it's ambitious, it's technologically within reach. So, just a little. Okay. That was my stomach. Sorry. Just a bit of background on CEPI. Close collaboration with global partners is crucial for the success of our work. So CEPI works with the pharmaceutical industry, academia, civil society and health organization, philanthropies, regulators, and governments to achieve our aims. As a public-private partnership, CEPI's primary governing body is the board, with representatives from our investors and independent members representing competencies from including industry, global health, science, resource mobilization, and finance. CEPI also has a scientific advisory committee providing guidance and information and challenge to CEPI staff and the board on decisions that we make on programs, target diseases, and the scientific aspects of our strategy. So this 100 days mission, as embraced by the G7 and G20, would give the world a fighting chance to stop the next pandemic in its tracks. So for its part, CEPI has a $3.5 billion strategy that over the next 5 years will kickstart and coordinate the work necessary to achieve this mission. And this is just to show what we have in our portfolio to date. So CEPI's priority pathogens include SARS-CoV-2, Lassa virus, Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus, Nipah virus, Rift Valley fever, and chikungunya virus. We're also leading leading global funder for R&D into the next generation of broadly protective coronavirus vaccines, with the potential to protect us from future variants of SARS-CoV-2 and any other coronaviruses that are yet to emerge. And CEPI also invests in platform technologies that can be used for rapid vaccine and immunoprophylactic development against unknown pathogens and disease X. And through our calls for proposals, we have announced over 50 partnerships with vaccine developers against our priority pathogens and disease X platforms. And only the most promising candidates will then go on to progress through development process with CEPI funding. So we were able to respond quickly to COVID-19 for primarily two reasons. One, we had conducted prior research into 2 related coronaviruses, that's SARS and MERS, as well as funding to support Oxford's ChAdOx platform. And number 2, decades of development mRNA technology allowed us to have fast and adaptable and highly scalable vaccine development. So how we are defining the 100 days mission is that the vaccines should be ready for initial authorization and manufacturing at scale within 100 days of recognition of a pandemic pathogen when appropriate. So this figure illustrates the timelines for vaccine development. Traditionally, it's taken around 5 or more years to develop a vaccine from a point of an outbreak. But with COVID-19, we saw this process compressed down to 350 days. To understand this and how this happened, we actually commissioned a study to interview stakeholders who were involved in this process to gain insights into the strategies employed to expedite vaccine delivery, and so that we can create an inventory of innovative approaches used for this acceleration. We then assessed what timelines could be achieved if we incorporated these innovations together with optimizing the other processes. But surprisingly, the gains were actually minimal. We assessed that we estimated around only 8 months could be achieved, as opposed to the 11 months that was already achieved previously, because there's little left to be extracted from that orange segment that you see there. So therefore, a paradigm shift is necessary. This is where the 100-day mission comes in. We need to adopt a different approach to preparation, execution, and regulation. This slide aims to illustrate the various activities encompassing preparedness before an event occurs, immediate response during a crisis, and the ongoing efforts required even after the initial 100-day period. Post 100 days, we must continue collecting data, conclusively demonstrating that vaccine effectiveness and gathering additional safety data. We may have limited data available for specific vaccine in question, so therefore it becomes imperative to leverage the vaccine library and prototype vaccines to inform regulators about the performance of vaccines on different platforms against various pathogens and pathogen types, and hopefully these would closely align with the pathogen that eventually emerges. And also, preparedness for outbreak response analytics is important. So developing new tools, setting up computational infrastructure and code and capacity building will be critical for this. So what will it take to achieve these goals? So we need to strengthen global surveillance systems and early warning systems, speed up identification of immune response markers, create vaccine libraries against representative pathogens from virus families that pose the greatest pandemic threat, establish global manufacturing capacity to help ensure that we can create top quality, safe and effective vaccines at speed, and getting clinical trials and laboratory networks at the ready. And modeling can support these various work streams. And for example, for surveillance, we could improve data collection, inform their modeling, and leverage AI for early warning systems. An example is we can develop risk maps to identify areas where surveillance is likely to pick up cases. For immune response markers, we could use within-host models of infection and immune response, and fitting the model to immunological data and viral load data to help identify correlates of protection. Under 3, vaccine libraries, we could use machine learning to develop future-proof vaccines by anticipating escape mutations. Under 4, for global manufacturing capacity, we can conduct supply chain modeling to identify bottlenecks in the whole vaccine chain process. And for clinical trials, we can conduct clinical trial simulations to identify optimal strategies under different scenarios. And I think our colleague is going to be talking later on the Presto project that we're funding. This slide illustrates the complexity about thinking about these 100 days and taking into account the pathogen, the scale of the outbreak, the severity of the outbreak, and the transmissibility. So assembling these key factors will lead to 54 different scenarios, and not all scenarios would require the 100 days. And though also to note that at the beginning of an outbreak, the world may not know what scenario we're in, so it could take up to months to understand the scale or the severity or transmissibility. So access is critical and at the heart of our plan. The 100-day mission would give the world a fighting chance to contain an outbreak close to the source before it becomes a pandemic. But it won't work if the vaccines are not deployed in the regions affected by the outbreak. So therefore, equitable access is critical and requires international collaboration and cooperation to achieve this. And I'll end with my last slide highlighting some examples of where we have used modelling or are interested in working with modellers who do this sort of work through calls for proposal processes. So I'll just mention some of the examples here. Under pandemic preparedness, we've modelled the impact of various intervention strategies, as well as modelled the course of an active epidemic outbreak happening. This is chikungunya in Paraguay. For vaccine development, we've used machine learning to predict immune escape for optimum vaccine design. And for public health policy, we've modelled the vaccine demand and estimated vaccine benefits for countries to inform the policy. And there are some other ideas and projects there as well. So as you've seen, our strategy is very much about doing what is necessary today and together in order to save tomorrow. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Arminder. So are there any questions from the room or any questions from online? Deirdre?
Thanks, Arminder. So as a user of Modeler now, rather than a generator of modelling, what types of modelling do you think it's easier to get traction with your stakeholders on the outputs?
Yeah.
Or do you think that the same barriers that were described by that WHO survey are still very present?
So I've come out of the modelling field from academia, so I've seen a lot of old faces, not aged, former colleagues, and so it's really nice to see everyone's faces. But what I see now from this side of the table is that modelers and policymakers, there's a gap in communication between the two, and it is what was highlighted already. They want to see immediate use of these models, and how can these models be used straight away? So we're kind of like the translators here at CEPI, my team and I. So we say, well, this is what the model will be used for immediately. In academia, what I found was that we would do modeling, but not really carry it through all the way up to the policy level and to its use. It would be a paper is published, and that's that. And it's that mindset, I think, that I shifted and changed when I got to CEPI, and I realized that communication gap still exists, where policymakers don't quite understand how the modelling will be used, or they're like, oh, this is brilliant, this is wonderful numbers, and that's it. They don't actually use them. They just appreciate it, but then there's not use. And like, where is that gap? So I think we are now launching a call for training policymakers in modelling, actually. So we'll be training them, we'll be requesting people to provide training material and carry out this training to ensure that policymakers can understand modelers, modelers can understand policymakers. But that's the gap that I can see at the moment. And what we also find is, as a modeler, that people don't know what to ask of modelers, and also modelers may not know what policymakers need. So again, there's another language barrier here in that sense. So I'd say do bridge that gap as much as we can.
Great. Just going to go right side. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for a really interesting talk. In passing in there, you pointed out that to contain maybe a pandemic, you need to make sure the vaccines are available in the right places.
Yep.
And your implication was that would be in the place where this is starting off. But of course, another way of containing it really well would be for everyone else to have vaccines. And it feels to me that there is potentially a tension there between who has the money and the access to things and the way they're used, let's say. And it also then, I'm trying to work out how I could make this into a question. So one is your comments on that. But I guess the other one is, I guess that is in itself ripe for modelling, right? And is that something that's going on? So
it is ripe for modelling, but
if it's not a good question, say something else.
My question is, what happens when we look at everyone else getting vaccinated? My concern is where the infection is originating, and our priority pathogens are all in Global South, they won't receive the vaccines. And so we want to empower these countries to be able to have manufacturing sites close by, have the capacity to model the outbreak as well, so they can really help themselves as well, rather than rely on the surrounding countries to everyone else to vaccinate them. So this is the situation we potentially saw in COVAX and COVID-19, where people were really vaccinating themselves and leaving behind other countries. So yeah, was that answering your question? Ish.
More than my question deserved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thomas?
So a specific example of that is clade 1 mpox, where what do you think the barriers are to, now you've got closer to policy, it seems like there's a very obvious win from more distribution of Jynneos in West Africa. What do you see as the main barriers to that? And could those barriers to more equitable distribution of orthopox vaccine be overcome with a nice bit of quantitative science that makes it clearer to policymakers that this may be in their self-interest as well as just the right thing to do.
And barriers to what? Sorry, I missed that.
Wider distribution of modern orthopox vaccine.
Yeah, so we do a lot of tech transfer as well. So we are building networks of manufacturing sites, laboratory networks as well. So the idea is to act as a network as well, and to respond to an outbreak rather than individual countries reacting themselves and relying on each other to collaborate. This will be a network, and this is where we facilitate a lot of these. So we've got the animal model network and central laboratory networks, and now we're having a modelling network, which will be something we'll be talking about at some point. And so it's, for us, the barriers are countries not being able to do this for themselves. And so this is what we want to ensure, that there is equitable access. That means countries being empowered. And they want to do it for themselves as well. And this is what we want to try and help. But we also need collaboration and cooperation from the global community to do this.
I would just say, Hannah, if you come up so we just swap over the laptops, practical. So there was a question on the very back row. Yes, thank you.
Could you please explain a bit more about the factors behind 100 days? Is it containing virology, epidemiology, finance, and industry side factors? Why are you proposing this exact 100 days mission?
It could be sooner, but we think it's possible. So the Ebola outbreak in Uganda has shown that it is possible to have a vaccine and deploy it even sooner than 100 days, and that's what we saw there. And 100 days is our moonshot. It could be sooner, but if we come close to that aim, we'll be happy. That's what all it is, and we're all working together with all the multiple industries to achieve that.
Cool, great. So there's a question from online, so I'll take this as a final question, but then we can come back to further questions in our discussion before lunch. So the question from online is, how about anticipated outcomes of the outbreak, the expected health burden as one of the criteria for building scenarios, and how would you categorise or approach that? So expected health burden is one of the criteria for building scenarios. How would you categorise or approach that?
So we actually do commission modelling to look at the impact of different scenarios, and that's how we are doing our clinical trial site simulations as well, but also our vaccine impact modelling. So what would be the impact of these vaccines? Should they be deployed? But we don't have those vaccines yet, or some of the parameters, and so we do have scenarios based on those multiple scenarios, with input from people on the ground as well. So our country partners will contribute and say, well, this is what we have for example, for our ENABLE study, it's a large Lassa study, we've had our partners there provide information on what they think the scenarios are, and worst case, likely, and best case scenarios. That's, I think, answers the question.
Cool. Great. So with that, let's thank Arminder again.
Thank you.